Hello everybody. So today I would like to do a short video on what is required for a night photography, and I would emphasize mostly on the ISO and the exposure composition. And there were a lot of questions I saw where you would use ISO or use exposure composition, decrease or increase during night photography, or even during the daytime when there is not enough light. So let's just start with that. So to understand that, let's just first understand what is ISO and what is exposure composition. So ISO is International Standard Organization, and that's the first organization which actually started to use that, and that is then taken up by a lot of companies which were into the camera business as well. So the ISO button on my camera, which is Nikon D5600, is over here, which is the function button over here. So if you just hold this button and then if you scroll this, you can change the ISO, and it goes by 1600, 1250, 1000. So this is how you can decrease it, and to increase it the other way you can go and you can increase this. And then the exposure composition is this button over here, which is with the sign plus or minus. So if you see here, and you just hold this button over here, and you just do on the right, scroll it right, you would see that it is moving by +3 +0.6 cards. First stop, f stop, and then another stop, f stop, and then goes to 1.0. so you are increasing the exposure composition. Now the difference between the ISO and exposure composition actually is not real a physical thing. So there is nothing like a physical parameter which is inbuilt in a camera which changes when you change the exposure composition. Whereas this ISO is actually a physical parameter which is inbuilt in the camera. Now coming to the exposure composition, so if I hold my exposure composition button over here and now I go one stop above, so you see the shutter speed. I'm in the aperture priority mode. If you see over here, now I'm going to the increasing my exposure composition, my shutter speed is actually increasing. You see this? So shutter speed keeps increasing. Now it's gone to 1 second, so I'm plus 2.3 in exposure composition. It's already at 1 second. So basically exposure composition is dependent on shutter speed, and aperture and ISO. So I have kept my ISO constant. So if I increase my shutter, if I increase the exposure composition in the aperture priority mode, my shutter speed decreases. Okay, and if I am in the shutter speed mode, then the aperture would widen if I increase the exposure composition. So exposure composition is actually dependent on these three things, and it doesn't do anything else for the camera. So you can basically say that exposure composition is actually an artificial intelligence of camera. So ISO came into picture when there was no digital photography, and when there were films which were being used, and those films actually used to come with pre-embedded ISO. So if you know about these films, the films are actually with silver and halide particles, and when you have a larger ISO, That means you have a larger surface area of particles, and that will absorb more light. So that was the idea of an ISO. But when the digital camera came, and this was no more there because we were not into manual photography. But in the digital photography, this is also almost similar. You have these sensors, these camera sensors, which are actually made of pixels, which are nothing but lot of diodes, which are semiconductor diodes, and these diodes are the ones which are actually playing a role in the ISO. So when you increase the ISO, the sensitivity of these diodes is increased, and there is a flow of electrons from the depletion region over here from the N to the P type, and that is how the ISO works. So you absorb more light, and then you have more of the electron flowing, and there is more exposure. So for night photography, you need a really good tripod, first thing, and second, you need a remote control if possible. But if you do not have a remote control, I would suggest you could actually use your camera, and you could use this button over here, which you can see over here, and if you click this, you would come to this frame where you would come to this frame, and then you can actually use a self timer, and then if you just click it, it would go on a self timer of 10 seconds without any noise. You could easily get a good picture, and that would allow you to take a photograph without the vibration from this button when you press it. So that's the use of the self timer when you don't have a tripod, when you don't have a remote control.